Shaping Britain's conversation. Speak to Sadiq. The Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, takes your calls.
A very good morning indeed to you. It is 3 minutes after 10, and as the man just said, the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, is with me. So the good news is you are spared one of my customary monologues, stroke rants, stroke introductions. Good morning, Mr. Mayor.
Good morning, James.
Well done for hiding your disappointment at the lack of a JOB monologue this morning.
I couldn't possibly comment. The smirk says it all, I think.
Yes, indeed it does. I think we'll crack straight on with the calls, actually. And Jazz up first in the City of London. What would you like to ask the Mayor?
Good morning, Sadiq. How are you?
Good morning, Jazz. Not bad at all. Thanks, mate.
Good. Sadiq, I own a business in Liverpool Street. We've been dying there for the last 9 months, as all the businesses are. What I wanted to know, I mean, you know yourself.
What's the business, Jazz?
You know, it's a barber shop.
Correct, yeah.
In the heart of the city. So we look after, basically, we're only there for all the city workers, of which there are only, as you know from TfL, from your figures, there are only, 15 to 20% of the people coming into the office, and they have been since March the 19th. Now, I want to know what you're doing specifically for businesses in the West End and the City of London that are hemorrhaging and that are dying on a daily basis. There's a blanket grant that's gone throughout the country, and basically, I mean, if you go to any suburban area, any local area, my local area where I live in Loughton, every single day on that high street is like a Saturday because people are working from home, so the coffee shops are busy, the restaurants, the takeaways when they're open, they're busy. The bars are busy. You go to the City of London, there isn't a soul. It's soul destroying to see. I mean, I've worked in the City of London for the best part of 25 years. Obviously, I've never ever seen anything like this at all.
It's funny, Jazz. It's like a Sunday.
Why you're not lobbying the government
to
get people back to work? You know, people are in this rut now where they're happy to be working from home. I would argue that some people have had the best 8 months of their life working from home. You know, they're saving a lot of money. They're saving their fares. They're not buying any lunches. And meanwhile, the part of London that is responsible for 25% of the country's GDP is dying, and you're letting it die.
Well, Jazz, let's deal with the various points you've made. Firstly, I agree with your analysis of the challenges we face in central London. I'll come into what I'm doing because obviously you make an accusation that I'm, inverted commas, letting it die. But you're right. As James has alluded to, central London, in particular, Canary Wharf, Liverpool Street, near where you are. But also, I've been going to City Hall every day for the last few weeks, and London Bridge is no better, I'm afraid, for the obvious reason that many big employees, many of the banks whose customers you would have cut their hair off, said to their staff, you can work from home until the next financial year, and our offices will be closed until the next financial year. Some places of work did make their offices COVID secure, but then the government went into lockdown for a month rather than 2 weeks in October, as we were lobbying for during the half term. And most people have made the decision not to make their places returned for their staff until April. And that's what's led to you having few customers, as indeed have the dry cleaners, the cleaners, the sandwich places and others in your neck of the woods. So one of the things that we've been doing to persuade the government to do more for businesses like yours is we got together businesses groups across London, and we made a roadmap to get us out of recovery into recovery when lockdown was lifted. And we wrote to the government. You asked what I've been doing, and that had a number of specific things the government could do to help businesses like yours and others. So businesses like yours that rely upon footfall and who for the foreseeable future will get no footfall, frankly speaking, needs to stay on life support, and that means bigger grants as soon as possible. The business rates holidays needs to be extended beyond March. The other big thing that we've noticed is the collapse of international tourism, and one of the reasons they're not coming, aside from COVID, is because the government have taken away the VAT refund, the 20% they used to get. So they're
just going to steer you towards what you are doing rather than what the government are not doing.
No, Jazz said, why aren't you doing more to get the government to help? And so what I was laying out to Jazz was some of the things we're doing to persuade the government to help. As far as City Hall is concerned, we're doing a number of specific things with our limited resources. We've had a back to business grant of millions of pounds to help businesses adjust their place of work to be COVID compliant. We've had separately a culture at risk grant of £2.3 million. Separately, we've had a pay it forward scheme for businesses like Jazz's who need cash flow to pay for bills. We've asked people to donate to get goods and services. You pay for them now and you receive them later on once restrictions are lifted. And the other thing we've done is to set up a business hub to give face-to-face advice, to advise people like Jazz where they can get grants going forward, because a loan's not good enough, because Jazz will tell you the problem with a loan is you've got to pay it back. And for the foreseeable future, money's going to be tight.
And that second lockdown stiffed a lot of people. I was talking to the publican, publican is a bit of an understatement. I was talking to Tom Kerridge about this the other day, and he was saying that people borrowed money for the reopenings, and then that's why there's so much anger about the Tier 3 designation.
This is the problem with false hope. What happened was the Prime Minister and his team gave people...
briefly, if you would.
This idea that actually things will be hunky-dory in the near future. People invested in making their place of work COVID secure and save sufficient monies to get staff back at a certain time. Because of... We can discuss why we got there. The second month worth of lockdown, non-essential closed down, including Jazz, that cash flow didn't come in.
Jazz, I'm very grateful to you for asking this question in such a measured tone, and I hope I don't spoil the mood by asking you this question. I mean, and also a few people have asked me to point out they've had the worst 9 months of their life and they can't wait to get back to a semblance of normality. But I appreciate you weren't suggesting otherwise. I hear people say they've got to go back to work. They've got to go back to work, and I understand the argument from your point of view as someone whose livelihood is under mortal threat. But how are you going to do it if the boss is happy to have the workforce working from home and the workforce is happy to work from home? What are you going to do?
I mean, I do a fair amount of CEOs and some of the top-end guys in the city, and believe you and me, they are desperate to get their staff back. They realise, I mean, everybody's banding around, this is the new way of working, people are going to be working from home, this is the future. The collaborative thinking, winning new clients, none of this is going on. You know, we've come out of Europe, we should be back behind our desks. 65-70% of the rest of Europe is behind it. Is back behind their desks working. We're still lounging around at home in our pajamas.
Again, I've got to keep the mood friendly. No one's lounging around at home in their pajamas, and I mean, the people I know who've been working from home don't fit into the category you described. But how are you going to do it? If the CEOs want to do it, there's nothing currently stopping them except this instruction that you should work from home if you can. And it seems to me that that's almost impossible to unpick. And, if you listen to this programme, I'm not really in the business of defending any politicians, let alone central government. But I don't see what else could be done in the current climate.
I mean, there are businesses that haven't reopened since March. We don't know whether.
But that's their choice, largely, isn't it? That's the problem. I mean,
a lot of them.
You can't get them at gunpoint onto trains.
Why would we reopen to lose money every week?
Yeah.
So we're losing less money by staying closed.
Yes, I get all of that. I'm cautiously suggesting that although the question is very simple, it doesn't admit a simple answer.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that Sadiq touched on was the grants. Now, the grants, the way they've been allocated, is per capita, is per person that lives within a particular area. So obviously, somewhere like the City of London has got very few people living in it, and therefore the grant has been allocated at £8 per person, which is the lowest in the country for an area that creates the most amount of wealth.
Yeah, so Jazz is losing out. Yeah, so Jazz, you're spot on. So we've been trying to explain to the government that areas like London, but City of London is the best example, the densities are very different to other parts of the country, and there's a one-size-fit-all approach. And also, your overheads are far, far greater than a barber's shop anywhere else in the country, I'd add. So you're spot on. And also, Jazz is right about these businesses rely upon innovation, teamwork, mentoring, and that's been lost over the last few months. Jazz, one of the things that could have led us to get back to some semblance of normality sooner is having a test trace system that works, but also to roll out asymptomatic community testing. But I think James is right. For the foreseeable future, in the next few months, your neck of the woods, Liverpool Street, City of London, will simply not be having the footfall you need, and that's why we continue to lobby the government. And you can go to my website and see the roadmap is business designed to get us out of recovery going forward, because this quarter, you will know, is the golden quarter, Jazz, where you get lots of your business to help you during the rest of the year.
Should be getting his Christmas envelopes as well. Jazz, before you go, very briefly, has your landlord cut you any slack, just out of interest?
I'd rather not mention who our landlord is, but
of course.
I mean, they're fairly big. And we've been helped with one quarter. We're fighting for another quarter. The last quarter of the year is due in December. Basically, we're storing up debt for the future. I haven't paid 2 quarters rent. There's a third one due in December. That'll be 3 quarters. What they're looking at doing is deferring it till next year. Now, deferring our rent is just storing up debt for
arrears.
There's no forward planning for us. We don't know what the future's going to bring. It's going to be a tough gig for the next year. I don't think we'll see any sort of... We may never see the levels back in the City of London as we previously had. But, if we get 60%, 70%, most businesses will work.
You can wash your face, you can carry on.
But, there's very little help from all angles.
Just to reassure you, Jazz, you're right to worry about the existential threat to the centre of our city, but we are working closely with the corporation, the City of London, working closely with businesses, some of whom are your customers, to have a roadmap to getting the City of London back to where it was. Part of that is what leads to investors coming to our city. Why does an investor choose London over Frankfurt or Madrid or Berlin or whatever? It's the unique ecosystem we have, not just finance, legal, professional services, tech, culture, restaurants, galleries, etc. So we're keen to keep what we had, and that's why. And you reminded us of the importance of doing so, because if we're not careful, we could be sleepwalking into the centre of our city, being a ghost town, not just on Sundays, but 7 days of the week, and we can't afford that to happen.
I'm going to crack on, Jazz, because it's already 10:15, but I do feel for you. A lot of the listeners do as well. Daniela is in Collier's Wood. Daniela, what would you like to ask the Mayor?
I was just, hiya there. I was just wondering, is there any way that he could save the Kensington High Street bike lanes being ripped out? Because, in Collier's Wood, it's been amazing. I've cycled in London for years, risked my life. The protection from the traffic is amazing. We've got loads of new friends that are cyclists that started cycling in lockdown. There's a real want for people to cycle.
I'm going to put. You've got your question.
So the short answer is,
straight to the Mayor.
Yeah, Daniel, we're trying our best. I'm somebody who used to cycle when I was little and then stopped cycling, and I've started cycling again over the course of the last few months for similar reasons to you. I feel far more safer and confident cycling around our city now. What we want to avoid is a car-led recovery. The short answer is that the Kensington High Street is the responsibility of the council. So we're trying to persuade them to do the right thing for the 4,000 cyclists.
People who don't know, and this is relevant outside London, I know our encounters can sometimes seem a little bubbly to my huge followings in places like Macclesfield and County Durham, but the cycle lane has been put in. There's furniture that's been installed on the street, and then it's been ripped out again.
Absolutely. And it cost us £300,000 of taxpayers' money to put those cycle lanes in. Not the council's money, monies from across the country, including London and Macclesfield, because we want to avoid a car-led recovery that leads to more carbon monoxide, nitrogen dioxide, and London coming to a gridlock. And so we want more people walking and cycling, particularly because of our concerns about using public transport at rush hour. The council owns the road, TfL doesn't. We control about 5% of roads in our city. The others are controlled by the councils, and we have a good relationship with most councils. This council has persistently refused to have cycle lanes in their borough. This cycle lane is working. It's working really well. It's used by thousands of cyclists, Daniela, including you, who feel safer using it. The council is ripping it out because a few people have signed a petition. Many of them, by the way, aren't residents, aren't even Londoners.
But many of them are.
No, of course, this is a legitimate discussion we should have in a cool, calm way. And what we should do, Daniela, is let the cycle lane be in for some time, see how it works out. After a few months, we can review it. We're already tweaking some of them across the city because there are issues. And there's nothing wrong in tweaking things or changing things and even doing U-turns. But after a short space of time, this seems to be a knee-jerk response, which I'm definitely against, and we're looking into getting our money back. But that doesn't resolve the issue that you're worried about, which is your personal safety.
What's the plan? Because all over the country, people have seen enormous plant pots appear at the bottom of their gardens, and where we are, there are roads that were once thoroughfares that have been closed off with plastic bollards and barriers, and I actually, probably to my shame, don't know what the plan is. Is it all lots of individual councils acting independently? Is there a master plan on a national or on a citywide scale? And is it just as almost like a secret endeavour to use the lockdown to turn much of the country into to remove the choice, to make driving such an unpleasant experience that people will get onto bicycles out of choice.
I don't think so. There's no conspiracy. If there is, I'm not part of it. I feel a bit left out. But what there is, though, is, Daniela, James, is a number of different solutions to the wish to get more people out of their cars and to be walking and cycling. So in some parts of London, some parts of the country, there are school streets where the street outside of school is closed off during the school day for obvious reasons, to encourage parents and children, teachers to walk, cycle, scooter to school. Other areas, like the one Daniela referred to, have segregated cycle lanes or quiet ways to get people off the main road under quiet ways. Others have the low traffic neighbourhoods that you're referring to. For the sake of speed, they've used planters or plastic cones to avoid the construction, but also you can then remove them if it's not working.
Would this have happened if we hadn't been in lockdown? I mean, I'm genuinely confused. I'm never really interested in road issues, but this fascinates me.
Yeah, there are two game changers. One is the government gave money, which wasn't available before, to councils. That's the big game changer. So we received about £70 million of money we wouldn't otherwise have received. So KNC did this scheme using government money. And the second game changer was the government relaxed the need for long consultations.
Yes.
So these could be sped up. There should be engagement.
Why? Do we know why they did that?
For speed, because the government conditions were, I want all these schemes in place by October, gone, if you want to receive the money. So councils unreasonably said, listen, we want the money. We've been thinking about this scheme for some time. We've now got this money, but we've got to bring the scheme in quickly. And that's led to people like you not being consulted about the schemes in your neighbourhood. The intention was a good one, to spend the money sensibly, but it's led to some challenges. And good councils, by the way, are listening and tweaking. What KNC are doing, Kensington and Chelsea, is a complete U-turn, which is dangerous for cyclists like Daniela and me and others who want to cycle, but also is going to lead to more pollution and more gridlock in London, because there is finite road space. We've got more deliveries, more people who need their cars for commercial reasons, but unfortunately, they're now given an incentive to drive when you could easily use public transport, walk or cycle.
This is politics at its gnarliest, in a way, because the success of these schemes will be judged by people who don't currently want to ride bicycles. They would much prefer to be in their cars. And the political calculation, understandably, is for the health of the planet, let alone the population, we need to get more and more people out of cars and onto either public transport or bicycles. I've read that it's a 5-year window usually. After 5 years of these measures being in place, the population can't remember what it was like before, and the new normal, to use a dreadful phrase, is established. But it's very close to being undemocratic, isn't it?
Well, actually, it takes shorter than 5 years, but you're right. The 5-year comes from a really good example in Waltham Forest, where Waltham Forest in 2015 brought in the sort of schemes we're talking about now, originally very unpopular. Waltham Forest were very brave, explained to residents why it's important, and they've noticed local businesses are doing much, much better now because of the footfalls increase. People are walking and cycling, stopping. Residents love it now. And those parents who were complaining previously about the shortcut being cut off by these planters are now walking, cycling, scootering with their children, and it's a huge success.
And that's the problem, is that how much time and space do you have, especially if a council like Kensington and Chelsea decides, for good or for ill, to hit reverse.
Absolutely. And the problem is people like Daniela who've been benefited from the cycling, who feel more confident and are thinking, shall I risk cycling if I don't feel confident? And the choice will be either to use public transport maybe in rush hour, we know the concerns around COVID, or deciding, because they can afford to do so, to drive. And what we want to do is encourage people to walk, cycle, or use public transport outside of rush hour.
Encourage or force is, I guess, where people... This is what I mean by it being undemocratic.
Oh, there's got to be incentives. There's got to be carrots and sticks. One of the reasons why I, for example, was keen to freeze fares over the last 4 years was to encourage more people to use public transport. We know now we want to avoid people using public transport in rush hour, so we want to encourage them to walk and cycle, make it easier. The government, to be fair to them, and I give them credit for this, have been trying to encourage people by giving more generous tax deductibles and cycle to work schemes, but also to make it safer to cycle to work. And also we've widened pavements as well. It's going to be a challenge in winter, but actually even in winter, there are more people cycling this winter than there were last summer in 2019.
Watch this space, but I don't think Daniela's likely to have what she desires in time for Christmas, is she? A reversal of this policy decision.
Unfortunately, the bad news is, Daniela, that the council are this week removing the cycle lane. We're going to get back the money that we spent on that cycle lane, and we're also going to consider all other options about that particular road, because the reality is it's an important road. It's not simply the local residents who need that road to be working efficiently, but the rest of us as well.
23 minutes after 10, and I mean, obviously we could continue talking about this until the cows come home, but we'll move on to David, who's in Borehamwood. David, you're through to the Mayor.
A very good morning.
Morning, David.
Hello, mate.
Hi. I have two questions. The second is quite a quick one and is about...
You just confine yourself to the one you told the producer about, if that's all right.
All right. The main question is why does the Mayor seem to flip-flop between policies either based from, originally from government guidance or
just if you could in a sentence, David, what's the question?
Can I just give you the example, and that is effectively the question.
Yeah.
The Mayor initially called for the 10 p.m. curfew in London to be put in. 3 weeks later, I think it was in the Evening Standard, he called for it to be scrapped because of the detrimental effect it had on London businesses. Why is the Mayor not consistent in his opinion on doing what's right for London rather than, he
has answered this before, but he can answer it again for you now.
David, I don't criticise you for not listening to Speech Sadiq in previous weeks and months, but what you're reading is propaganda. So the reality is, David, is this: it's quite old-fashioned.
It's not propaganda. He's right. You did support it, and then you didn't.
James,
yes.
let me answer this question. Right. It's called looking at the evidence, and it's quite old-fashioned, David. But if something's not working, don't be dogmatic or ideological. Change your mind. And so the 10 p.m. curfew was brought in for the best of intentions, which is to reduce the amount of time people socialise and pass on the virus when they're interacting. What we saw happening, though, very quickly was people congregating outside pubs, bars and restaurants, but also our tubes and buses being very busy shortly after 10 p.m. So rather than the virus spreading slower, it was probably spreading faster. So we said to the government, this isn't working, you should review this. And actually what I was lobbying for was staggering the closing times. The government has listened, David, thanks to us looking at the evidence and me lobbying, has removed the 10 p.m. curfew. They've gone to 11 p.m. with last orders at 10. What I'd have preferred them to do is stagger the closing time so you didn't see congestion. Does that make sense, David?
It does make sense.
Okay, well, that's called progress, right? So that's you asking me a planted question, me responding, and us making progress.
Why did you say it was planted?
Because I see this sort of stuff in Tory press releases all the time. And all I'd say to Londoners, respectfully, don't read that sort of stuff. It'll make you go blind.
Don't be rude to my callers. I suspect you're going to reach for the P word again on this, because the Mayor is responsible for any closures of small businesses because he has extended the congestion charge in a time of crisis. There is absolutely no excuse for this. Do you want to run that one around the head?
Absolutely. And again, I'm really happy to come into this LBC all the time to re-answer questions asked before. So the way it worked is that the central government, said to me and TfL, yes, we accept you've lost 90% of your customers because Londoners did the right thing, didn't use public transport. But rather than giving you a blank cheque for 18 months like we've given to the privatised train operating companies, we're going to give you a 6-month cheque and attach conditions. One of those conditions is you must reintroduce the congestion charge, which I'd suspended straight away. And the other condition is to raise the congestion charge from £11.50 to £15. If you don't accept those conditions, you will not receive support from us. TfL will not have the money to run the services, and you'll have to reduce tubes, bus, trams, overground at a time we're increasing services to get people out of the lockdown back to work. The second part of this story, though, so that's the first part of the story, caller. The second part of the story is the government also said to me, you've got to extend now the congestion charge, £15, to go up to the North Circular and down to the South Circular. You'll be pleased to know we've managed to win the argument and have not agreed to extend the congestion charge up to the North and South Circular, but they still want us to do so. I'm resisting that.
Let's go to Bo, who's in Camden. Bo, you're through to the Mayor.
Good morning, Bo.
Good morning, how are you?
Not bad, thanks. Are you okay?
Very good, yeah. I'm giving you a ring, actually, because I'm actually at work, but it's actually my last day at work today.
Oh, no, what do you do, Bo?
So I'm a grounds maintenance worker for Camden. I'm actually subcontracted through Camden Council, so I do all the estate work and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But really, what I wanted to ring you about was I really ask you if you were made aware of the fact that a lot of us agents, well, I'm through an agency at the minute, but a lot of us agency staff are actually being let go over Christmas. And the reason it is to each individual person is just complete nonsense. For example, they've told me that there's no work, but it's my job to actually go out and tell them what work needs to be done. Now, what they're doing is they're just letting off these agency staff to save money. That's pretty obvious. And during this pandemic and stuff like that, they're like, for example, I'm getting laid off for 3 weeks over Christmas. I'm going to have to sign on. Now, I've listened to Nick earlier on where you were saying, and they were talking about a company, Crossrail, burying £1 million of equipment. They can't pay me £400 a week to actually do a job. Now, this has got to be happening to so many people. Like, not only
so they
in
just
London,
sort of put you. They sort of put you on hold, do they, Bo? You've got presumably a contract, and they just suspend it for the holiday period rather than paying you either holiday.
They've got me on a 6-month period, right. And they've suspended it, like you said, over Christmas. Now, a lot of the people, I can find myself something else. I'll try my hardest if it comes down to it. But there's a lot of people who won't speak up for this because they know that if they speak up, they might not have that job in January. Now, for example, I spoke to my manager and I said that this was wrong, and what he's done, he's just put me on all the crap jobs.
But listen, firstly, I'm really sorry you're losing your job, particularly over Christmas. Unfortunately, there are hundreds of thousands of Londoners like you who are on either zero-hours contracts, agency workers, non-permanent labour, and so it's easy for employers, as James was alluding to let you go because it saves money. You don't get holiday pay, you don't get sick pay, and all the other rights that permanent employees get. And it's not just Camden Council. Many employees, including TfL, that I'm responsible for, have let go non-permanent labour because we're prioritising permanent staff, and it is heartbreaking. One of the reasons I've been...
But he is permanent, isn't he, really?
No, agency workers aren't, though.
That's technical.
The way it works is, I don't get into boring contractual law, but agency workers have got as Bo will confirm, have got very little rights in relation to, even when they're sick or, if there's a woman having maternity leave, all the rest of it and stuff. So they've got very little rights, and someone like Bo can be let go quite easily. The issue, Bo, is councils in London have a deficit of about £1.1 billion. So they're doing whatever they can to make the books balanced. They're now, just so you know, Bo, setting their budgets for next year. The amount of council tax they receive from residents has gone down by about 7% and business rates by 11%. And the amount of money from government's gone down as well at a time where they've spent more. So they're making tough decisions. And it's no consolation to you, but and forgive me for using this phrase, but agency workers are a low-hanging fruit to save money. And so one of the reasons why we've been lobbying the government, you may have heard of something called Excluded UK or Forgotten Limited, because we work out across the country there are about 2.9 million people like you who miss out on government support because for a variety of reasons. And so we're lobbying the government because you've fallen through the cracks and you will be laid off, as you said, and will have to sign on without getting the support that you need.
The Crossrail story is rightly being alluded to by both. Theo Usherwood reporting this morning on just epic sums of money, some of which must be avoidable costs.
Yeah, first look, it's far for me to correct Theo Usherwood, but he's wrong on some of his story. Let me deal with some of the issues that he raised. So a lot of the drivers for Crossrail are driving trains with passengers on them. The Crossrail is running stage 4 and stage 5, so Liverpool Street to Shenfield. Crossrail trains with Crossrail drivers, missed out by Theo's report. But also we've got trains running on the Heathrow to Paddington line, Crossrail trains with Crossrail drivers. And other drivers are being used to test trains on the central section. We now have 6 trains running, each way being tested. It is the case that the drivers are being used, but it's also the case that there has been a delay with Crossrail. And it's really important that Crossrail opens as soon as possible, and we make sure that we can start bringing in the economic dividends that Crossrail will bring in.
Not going to put any presents under Bo's Christmas tree, is it? And these figures are absolutely enormous. Yeah, and for someone like him just being told...
But you're linking Crossrail with Bo's horrible situation and the situation of millions across our country who were working. Some were furloughed, some weren't furloughed, and who are going to be made unemployed. I've said for some time, and my concern is we're going to see levels of mass unemployment in the 2020s we last saw in the 1980s, and I'm afraid I'm being proved right.
I think we should introduce some good news now. So I'll just pause the calls. I'll be with you imminently, Cameron. But the vaccine, this is the best news we've had in years, right? Possibly in a lifetime.
It is fantastic. It really is wonderful news, but there's a but coming up. The but is this. It will take some time for the vaccine to be rolled out so all of us can have it, so we can go back to some sense of normality that Jazz and others have been calling for. So in the meantime, please, please, please continue to follow the rules, because if we're not careful, we could see the virus surging again, and us as a city either going into tier 3 the next time there's a review, or there even being a national lockdown. That's why it's really important. Of course, let's celebrate this fantastic news. This plus mass testing means that there is finally light at the end of the tunnel. But it's really important we don't get carried away with this fantastic news.
Let's go to Cameron, who's in Waltham Forest. Cameron, what would you like to say?
Good morning.
Good morning, Cameron.
No problem. Basically, I would like to ask a question, Sadiq Khan, regarding when we was in the first lockdown, NHS drivers were getting praised a lot, and recently, as months went down, it seems like we're not being noticed anymore.
You're an ambulance driver, Cameron.
I'm I'm a care assistant ambulance driver.
Okay.
That's correct.
And the question is?
And the question is that during the first period of the lockdown since March, we was getting praised, like we was getting happy claps for NHS, etc.
Yeah.
We was getting discounts, we was getting support from everywhere. But recently, there's been no support. There's not been any support with parking. There's not been no support with the NHS, if that makes sense. It's like it's been dialed down.
Sure. Well, Cameron, let me thank you for the amazing work you and your colleagues have done over the last 9 months. You're right, rightly so. There were things like clap for carers and other examples of us showing our gratitude to NHS workers. That's going to carry on, Cameron. One of the few things that I welcomed in the announcement from the Chancellor last week was for NHS staff to receive, a well-deserved pay increase. My issue is other people like care workers, those in the front line should also get a pay increase as well. They've got a pay freeze. And so thank you very much for the amazing work you've been doing. I speak regularly to London Ambulance Service for the amazing work you've been doing. I'm afraid the bad news is, Cameron, January's going to be really busy for you and your colleagues, and so that's why it's really important that Londoners follow the rules to avoid a situation in January where, in addition to your normal January busy month, you've got additionally COVID patients as well.
You're just feeling a bit unloved, I sense. Are you, Cameron?
Yeah, of course, because obviously COVID patients have been increasing, but we're not getting the actual support that we are needed in order to do the job. On top of that, everywhere you go in London, there's been road closures. So unfortunately, for the patients to be on time and to get home, it's taking them hours. It's taking them twice as long as just to get home. You're sitting in traffic. You're saying that you're doing road closures to stop congestion, but you're causing more congestion by causing roadblocks.
It's another good point.
Well, Cameron, that's exactly the reason why we want to avoid a car-led recovery, because of people like you. So what's happening is the numbers of people using their cars has gone up to pre-COVID levels, and that's one of the reasons why we've been keen to encourage people to walk or cycle, because we know that London is a very old city and the roads are narrow, and by people going back in their cars, for people like you, for people like the blue light services who are using their blue lights, for deliveries and commercial workers, think of the plumbers, the electricians, they're stuck in traffic. And that's one of the reasons why we're so frustrated by councils like Kensington and Chelsea, who are not making it easier for people to walk and cycle. But I just want to echo, Cameron, thank you very much for the amazing work you've been doing and colleagues have been doing. I'm afraid we're going to need you to continue to work extremely hard over the winter months as well. But just to reassure you, Londoners are extremely grateful for the amazing work you and other colleagues in the NHS and also the care sector have been doing as well.
I would add to that, actually, that it's a population issue as much as a politician issue, this. And we've all perhaps forgotten that first flush of warmth and affection, admiration and gratitude for NHS workers. And I'm glad you've reminded us, Cameron. I'll do my best to sort of keep spirits up as well moving forward. But I have to say that it's the roads that everybody is concerned about today, not just in London, although that is obviously your purview. Mark in Lewisham returns to the theme. Mark, what would you like to ask them?
Morning, Mark.
Good morning both. Thanks for taking my call.
Pleasure.
Good morning, sir. Just echoing slightly the last caller's point. I popped to my local Sainsbury's yesterday. Had to do some heavy shopping. Had to take the car. Normally it would have taken 5 minutes to nip down the shops. I'm forced onto the South Circular to do a major detour because of the road closures. Put an extra 3 miles on my journey. and got stuck in traffic at a standstill. Surely that can't be helping with the ultra-low emission zone, which is being extended next year to the South Circular and to the North Circular.
A lot of people think it's deliberate. I don't know if you're alluding to that some of these traffic calming measures or these road closures are designed to push cars into what will then become an area which they have to pay to use. Are we going down that road, Mark? Genuine question.
We are indeed.
Right,
we are indeed. And that brings me very quickly on to my second point. The mayor has obviously mentioned that he's going to be forced into, or was going to be forced into, the expansion of the congestion charge. Obviously, central London is mainly, one would think, commercial business properties. If it's extended down to the South Circular North, where it's primarily residential, can you give us any idea what the government are proposing to those people who live in that area? Because if I take my car off my driveway, am I going to be charged as a resident?
Yeah, OK, Mark, three issues you raised. Let me deal with them. So firstly, the Lewisham Low Traffic Neighbourhood is a council scheme, and it's temporary and can only be made permanent after consultations. To reassure you, Mark, it's not a conspiracy for us to try and get more people on roads that we control. So if Lewisham make it permanent, they'll need to consult people like you. It's a temporary scheme, and I understand the council are looking at amending the scheme because of concerns raised by people like you, genuine concerns raised by people like you. The second issue that was raised actually by James was, is this a way to get more people into ultra-low emission zone areas maybe in advance of the extension in October? The short answer is no, because it's a low traffic neighbourhood scheme from the council.
I know that's an odd question, but people need proof that isn't the secret master plan.
For the simple reason why it isn't is because ULEZ is about polluting cars. So if your car is not a polluting car, you don't pay the ULEZ. And actually, we've noticed since the ULEZ was brought in central London, the number of cars that are non-compliant, so pay the charge, has gone from 39% to 79%. So we don't want to bring money in. We want cars that aren't polluting, and the evidence actually is that's led to less polluting cars elsewhere as well. So what will happen is, once ULEZ rolls out to the North Circular and South Circular in October 21, what we aren't going to see is massive revenue incomes for TfL. Because most Londoners haven't got the polluting cars. There was initially a surge.
Do you, Mark? Sorry to interrupt. Do you have a polluting car? Just out of interest.
No, not at all.
So you wouldn't pay this. You wouldn't pay this charge anyway.
But the third point Mark raised may be relevant.
Yes. Okay. Go on.
The third point Mark raised, which may be relevant, Mark, which is a good question, really good question as well, is if you take your car off the drive under the congestion charge. And this was my concern, Mark, because the congestion charge, you're spot on, was for central London to do with congestion, not for people like you living in Lewisham, and you would be lumbered with a congestion charge if the government succeeded in extending that to the North Circular and South Circular. So if you, for example, Mark, got your car off the drive, because you needed to go for a heavy shop in Sainsbury's or wherever, other supermarkets are also available, you would have to pay 15 quid. And we worked out 4 million Londoners would have been caught by the government's plans. That's why we pushed back, James, because it had been 4 million, not even poor Londoners, whose cars aren't polluting cars, aren't necessarily causing congestion, but it's revenue raising rather than alleviating congestion.
Okay. Thank you, Mark. We've got time for one more question. Before that, I just want to run by you. We mentioned this vaccine, which was, of course, developed in Germany by a company run by the children of Turkish immigrants and will be produced in Belgium under the auspices of an American company. The Secretary of State for Education this morning suggested that we have managed to approve it for use first because we are a, and I quote, much better country than every single one of them, aren't we?
Look, this is jingoistic nonsense.
It's quite funny.
I'm as proud as the next man I want, but this guy is the person responsible for education in our country.
That's a little awkward.
Well, that's the problem. And he was being serious, by the way. He wasn't making a joke. And this sort of British exceptionalism is I think misleading.
English, actually. I don't want to get bombarded by Scottish complaints.
And the good news for us Londoners is he's not a Londoner.
But can you respond substantively to the suggestion that it's because we're better than his dad's bigger than your dad, perhaps?
I don't want to be old-fashioned, but the evidence isn't there. The evidence is that actually we use the rules that the EU designed under the European Medicines Agency. Our agency that gave the approval was using the European rules. So the idea, and by the way, we've not left the EU as far as the rules are concerned. The transition period means up until the 31st of December, we abide by EU rules. And so I don't want to take away from the brilliant news that we're going to get this vaccine pretty soon. The brilliant news that an American-owned company had this manufactured in Belgium by Germans of Turkish origin, probably of Islamic faith. But this is good news. And I'm afraid what this politician is doing is typical, English jingoism that I think is unnecessary. And what it does is it just leads to a sort of us versus them that we don't really need.
I thought it's worth. I don't think that Jacob Rees-Mogg, Nadine Dorries and others were deliberately misleading people yesterday. I think they made genuine mistakes. Would you agree with that? They didn't quite understand the legislation that was brought in last month, or indeed the ramifications of what happens at the end of this month, rather than deliberately seeking to mislead the public. I think that's probably an unfair accusation.
I'm not. I think there are some politicians who quite enjoy a culture war. I think it suits their benefit to be involved in a culture war, and they've reached a conclusion and they use the evidence to try and suit their ends, and that's always dangerous. I think to give the Prime Minister some credit, which is unlike me, he rode back from that in the press conference, and he was quite careful not to make the same point. And Boris Johnson, to give him credit, didn't do that. And so what I'd say in a respectful, courteous ways, we're all proud to be British. Many of us are proud to be English. Some of us are incredibly proud to be Londoners as well, all three. But let's just be, look at the facts and give credit where it's due. And I'm really grateful to the American company, to the German, scientists, but to the Belgian manufacturers for the work they've done. But also, I'm really pleased that our regulators got it through quickly, which means by next week, many of us, not you or I, but many of us in terms of, Londoners and Brits and English people will be able to take the vaccine.
Squeeze in one more. Javed's in Poplar. Javed, you're through to the Mayor.
Yes. Good morning, Mayor. Good morning, James.
Hi, Javed.
I'd just like to ask about Mr. Khan's opinion regarding the deportations of people back to their countries, despite the fact that they've lived here for many, many years, in some cases involving very minor offences.
Jamaican-born criminals. In some cases involving very serious. But this was your day job before you became a politician.
Javed, can I just be quite clear that what we do know is that there are many British people who should have a British passport and British citizenship, but because their parents or members of their family didn't fill in the documentation at the right time, because they lost the documentation, and because there was a hostile environment, they've not regularised their citizenship and their nationality.
Is it that simple?
Sometimes it is, I'm afraid. And what makes it worse, Javed and James, is there's been a huge amount of secrecy around the deportation flight, and there's been lots of questions asked about processes being explored. And one of the great things about our country, Javed, is we've got independent judges that can't be corrupted. Now, these judges have decided, looking at the evidence, that some people shouldn't be deported. And rather than due process and the rule of law being followed, our Home Secretary is castigating the lawyers who are bringing forward the cases on behalf of those who have been deported. And I'm a firm believer, by the way, if you can't do the time, don't do the crime. But many people have done the time because they've done the crime, and they are British. They've got no connections at all with Jamaica, and they've been deported. And I think it's really important for us to look at the evidence. Again, I've mentioned the word evidence a number of times, Javed, and apologise for that in the last 35, 40 minutes. But I get really frustrated when people in my profession play to the audience or play to a certain type of audience. And I'm afraid, Javed, I don't agree with, at night time, with lots of secrecy, people who could have a good claim to stay in this country being deported. What I'd rather have is there be due process for the evidence to be looked at, for a decision to be taken, and then in the full glare of sunlight for them to be deported then.
Is it true? I've been reading up on this morning. Is it true that you can't instruct a lawyer to resist a deportation order until your seat's been booked on a plane? Because I keep reading about last-minute appeals, and I was interested in where that phrase comes from.
The government changed the rules. A number of things, James. Firstly, it's really difficult to find a lawyer who specialises in this area. It's very difficult to pay for a lawyer. But the government's made it more difficult to appeal while you're here. Actually, on some cases, you can only appeal once you've been deported. There were examples, Javed, of people who had been deported, part of the Windrush generation, had been deported to countries of origin, knew nobody there. They passed away there, for a variety of reasons. It was subsequently discovered they had a good claim to have stayed in the UK and shouldn't have been deported. And that's my point about the secrecy. The fact that you're doing it in secret, the fact that the government's not explaining with each individual case why they're being deported and the merits are being explored or the demerits, leads to a cloud of suspicion, particularly when we know that there's been a generation who've been treated badly by the government and there is a hostile environment.
And yet, if I was a headline writer, I'd be in clover just by describing foreign rapists and foreign murderers being protected by lefty lovies and lawyers and soft judges.
Well, and it's those same people, by the way, who need to accept that once we leave the European Union properly, it'll be far more difficult for us to deport to countries in the European Union. It'll be far more difficult to extradite criminals from Europe to here and from us over there. It'll be far more difficult for our police to work with Europol, with EU agencies. And it's this point about people using an argument to suit their political purpose. And I think it's wrong.
The next time we see you, we will be out of the European Union, won't we?
Well, yeah, I mean, absolutely right. The transition period will end. I suspect, my prediction is there'll be a flimsy, thin deal made and Johnson will claim huge credit for a deal being made. But I'd remind your listeners, 80% of our economy is the service economy: finance, legal, professional service, creative, tech. None of that is covered in any of this deal being considered by the government.
Just put on my screen, you've got to go now. The Mayor's team is freaking out. So my apologies for detaining you unduly. We shall let you go now and wish you a very